Welcome, everyone. How are you all doing? Good. You had your coffee refill? Feeling energized? All right. Well, thank you for coming back. Thanks for being here. We have, until lunchtime, we're going to be having a lovely panel discussion with a variety of Quaker agencies. I want to say that this is the first time. You can't hear me? Is it because I'm moving around? Is this better? Okay, thank you. So want to welcome you to this panel discussion. For the first time, I believe, ever at our corporation meeting, we've had the privilege of bringing together a variety of different Quaker agencies from across the globe. And so what we're going to do is we'll hear a little bit from them about what their work is. And this is expected to be an interactive Q&A forum for us to learn more about what they're doing and how we've been collaborating together as Quaker agencies. So Joyce, do you mind if I pass the mic to you to do an introduction?
Yes, I wanted you to introduce yourself. Exactly.
I'm so used to being on a Teams call where my name is there and you can all see it, so I thought you all knew who I was. I'm Marianne Elias, the Director of Program Operations for International Programs. I'm based in Philadelphia and have had the lovely joy of working for 10 years with our international program staff, so thank you. On to you, Joyce.
Wonderful. Thank you. Is Nzizwe, she managed to come online? Huh? Not quite yet. Okay, well, I hope that we can work. Okay, sorry. Well, it does give me great joy to be here. I've dreamt of this moment, so that is wonderful. Before I start there, I wanted to announce that we want to have a photo opportunity after this. So please don't leave the room. And those online, please stay online. And I think if we can just gather here and take a photo after this session, that would be really awesome. Oh, thank you. So it gives me great joy to welcome what I call my friends, really, to this panel. This group has given me personally so much strength and fed my soul in more ways than one, especially during the pandemic era when we were all trying to make things work. It really brings me joy to welcome friends here in Philadelphia and on the screen from their homes and offices. I would like to start by introducing the folks online. We have from British Yearly Meeting, the recording clerk. Is that Paul Parker? Can we see Paul Parker? That's not Paul Parker. That's Paul Parker. Yes, Paul Parker, welcome to our annual meeting. Linked also to London, Tim G., General Secretary of the Friends World Committee on Consultation. Welcome, Tim. And I see Nzizwe is on the phone. Welcome, Nzizwe. Nzizwe Madlala Rutledge is the director of our Quaker UN office in Geneva. We also have from the Canadian Friends Service Committee, Jennifer Preston. Hi, Jennifer. If you could show yourself, that would be great on the screen. Here you are. Hi, Jennifer. In this room, well, I'll start from here. We have Sarah Clark. Many of you know Sarah already. She's part of the AFSC family. Sarah is our director for the New York CUNO office. CUNO is Quaker UN office. So I'm not going to repeat that. So CUNO. And welcome, Sarah. To my left is Oliver Robertson, General Secretary of QPSW, the Quaker Peace and Social Witness, representing British Friends. Welcome, Oliver. And to my right is Bridget Moyes, General Secretary of the Friends Committee on National Legislation, FCNL. Welcome, all of you. We also have the Quaker Council on European Affairs, QPSW, new executive director, Tracy Martin, who is not going to be with us today, but she did send some responses to some questions, and so we want her voice with us. And so you will hear a bit about about the QCA, Quaker Council on European Affairs in Brussels. So, just a lot of people have asked me about this group, like, why are you together and who are you? And it started, I believe, there were different iterations before I joined AFSC of folks coming together. But I remember 5 years ago in Geneva, I was attending the QNO Geneva meeting, and Paul was there, and QBSW was there, and WCC was there, and we just started talking informally, and we were like, we should form something regular, and we did, and we committed to that. And we met in London twice to share some of our, common work, etc. But and I'll talk a little bit more about why we meet and what we hope to achieve together. But I think during the pandemic and with all the Zoom happening, we realized that we could make use of our time together even more often, more than that one time in person. And we started meeting quarterly. So every 3 months, we all meet on Zoom, and it's been really invigorating. To me, the meetings, we share news about what's going on in our organizations, trying to find synergies and ways to connect. We also learn from each other. We just did a restructure. So what did you learn? And so we share some of that work and lessons learned, and so we can keep learning from each other. We also shared the gifts of our staff, because we're the heads of organizations, but our staff are also there, and they connect on different topics, whether it's on fundraising or on particular issue like migration, and I'll talk a bit about that in a bit. But so that is the type of things that we remind ourselves of, is that we need to also encourage our staff to connect on whatever they're doing. We know that we're a small congregation, and we know that we have limited capacities compared to other denominations. But we believe in the power of our collective voice, and I think that is what this is all about: is how do we bring ourselves together to make more impact together as Quaker organizations. So when compelled, we take joint stance. Recently, we did a joint statement on Ukraine. 2 years ago or more, we did a very powerful statement on migration. It took about 2 years of discernment to get that migration statement going, because each comes from a different space and with different directions and policies to consider, and so we brought it together as a very powerful statement. Last year, when we met in London, we produced an epistle that where we committed to so many things on climate justice and racial justice, and it's online. You can go and read our epistle, which is extremely powerful. To me, it's like the reference point. But most of all, I think for me is we support each other. We support each other spiritually, emotionally, as leaders, sometimes struggling, going through difficult moments. We come together and we offer each other support. And so I think that to me is the most powerful. After this meeting on Monday, Sunday night, tomorrow night, we head to Pendle Hill, and we are going to have our annual retreat, where we will be together for 3 days, discussing issues. Like we have a session on racial justice and a session on authoritarianism and democracy. We have Doug Bennett joining us for half a day, and he's going to lead us in a session about Quaker leadership and the quirkiness of it, and what's great about it and what's challenging about it. And we're going to have a session on that's going to be recorded. And so we will, we continue to labor together. And I just wanted to extend my gratitude to all of them, to their friendship and their wisdom. And we're a formidable group together, and we can move the mountains. And so we are ready to do the hard work. And so I just wanted to say that also we're discerning like how inclusive this group is, and who else to include. And we know that there are so many other organizations, and so far we kept it small, but we are in discussion about how do we sort of spread our wings even wider. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor back to Marianne for you. And I think that the introductions is something you will do, or?
Sure, yeah, I can do it.
You can do it.
Yeah,
okay.
Because I can see the online right in front of me. So so what we'd like to do now is thank you, Joyce, for that welcome and explaining to everybody. Can you all hear me? Is that good? Okay. Reminding everybody why we're here together and what the collective voice means. And so what we thought it would be nice to do is hear from each of the different agencies. If you can reintroduce yourself, give us your name, your title, your organization, where you are located, and then 1 or 2 sentences about your work. I know that's a bit tough because you all do so much. So what are 1 or 2 things you want people in this room and online to walk away with, noting that you can elaborate on your work through the Q&A. So as we're talking and asking questions, you can bring up some of your favorite aspects of the work jointly as well as independently. So, and then I would really like to hear from you, what gives you life in this work? So if we may start online, I see Nazizwe is online. We've got you on camera. Fantastic. Welcome. How about we go in this order? Nazizwe, because I saw you first, then Jennifer, then Tim, then Paul, and then we'll reach out to our friends at the table here. Welcome, Nazizwe.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, friends. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I was hearing an echo, so I'm clear now. Thank you. I'm happy to join all of you. I've had a bit of trouble with technology. My name is Nozizwe Madlala Routledge. I'm director of the Quaker United Nations office in Geneva. I lead a fantastic organization that is 75 years old, that was created in 1948 by Quakers after they received the Nobel Peace Prize for the humanitarian work they did during World War I and World War II. Our work is alongside the United Nations, helping the United Nations stand firm on its goals for which it was created, to end all wars. I will say more later on, but we have 4 programs. Those 4 the programs that we have are targeting issues of peace to ensure that the Quaker testimonies and values for which we were founded are upheld. We also have a program on human rights and migration, a program on human impacts of climate change, and finally a program on sustainable and just economic systems. I'll say more later. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Nazizwe, what gives you life in your work?
Oh, what gives me life in my work is knowing that I'm letting my life speak, that I'm following up on Quakers who started this work, and that I will be here hopefully for the next so many years, continuing and building on this foundation. And my passion is bringing young people and diversity into this work.
Fantastic. Thank you. Jennifer, are you able to unmute?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hi, my name is Jennifer Preston. I'm the General Secretary at Canadian Friends Service Committee. And we've always felt that we're sister organizations with the American Friends Service Committee. And I am coming to you today from Guelph, Ontario, which is in southwestern Ontario, about 70 kilometers from Toronto, just to give you a sense. It's the traditional territory of Anishinaabe peoples. And just a tiny bit about CFSC. CFSC is quite a small organization in some ways and large in others. We have one yearly meeting in Canada, and so we are the service organization of Canadian Yearly Meeting. We're separate organizations, but we are the national body for all Quakers in Canada. We have 3 program areas: peace, and criminal justice, and Indigenous rights. And in addition to being the General Secretary, I coordinate the Indigenous rights program, and I have coordinated the Indigenous rights program at CFSC for about 25 years. So I've been at CFSC, obviously, since I was a teenager, and have moved into the role of General Secretary, I guess about 5 years ago or so. Maybe it was a little longer. But so I manage both of those pieces. And we have our national office in Toronto, and we are in the process of setting up an office in Ottawa to have a government representative based in our nation's capital. And I guess I would say, in terms of what gives me life, I would say I actually thought about that question. And I would say what gives me life in the work is the relationships that I get to work with, both within Friends and also many external to Friends, many of the Indigenous partners that I've had the privilege of working with over the past decades.
Thank you. Tim.
Hello, friends. Greetings. My name is Tim G. I'm the General Secretary of the Friends World Committee for Consultation in the World Office. The office is in London, in Friends House, which is the same building as Oliver and Paul work in. But physically, I'm at home today, just south of Oxford. Friends World Committee exists to bring friends together from different countries and cultures and traditions to express our common heritage and message to the world and find the things that we have in common based on God's call to universal love. And what gives me strength and hope in the work is that I've always had a commitment to being a global Quaker. But in this job, this gives me the ability to my head is in global Quaker world every day. So my Quakerism isn't bounded by the country that I'm from, or the yearly meeting I'm a member of, or the continent I'm from, or the Quakers I happen to have met so far. But I have the sense of being part of a global Quaker family, which is vibrant and is growing and is diverse and is working for peace in different ways everywhere. And the thing that I find really exciting about it is that FWCC exists to give that experience to anyone who wants to engage with FWCC.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim. Paul.
Hello, friends. My name's Paul Parker. I'm recording clerk of Britain Yearly Meeting, the senior staff member employed by the National Organisation for Quakers in Britain. I think in the US I would be a general secretary, but in Britain I'm a recording clerk. And the organisation of Britain Yearly Meeting really has, I think, 3 main purposes. The first is to support the Quaker community in Britain to thrive. The second is to build a sustainable and peaceful world. And Oliver, my colleague who's sat in front of you in Ray Street, will say a bit more about that, I'm sure. And the third is to maintain a Quaker presence in Britain, to make sure we're visible and understood, and that we are telling the world that Quakers still exist today and are not perhaps a 17th century oddity that died out some time ago. So I'm based at Friends House in London, but I'm speaking to you today from my home, which is in Saffron Walden, about 40 miles north of London. What gives me life in this work, I think in the context of this group of agencies, is two things. The first is the sense that the work we are doing is the discerned work of friends. It's not just something that I or the 100 or so staff I work with have dreamt up. It's the work that we as a Quaker community have worked out together, discerned together, and are called to. And so when we go out into the world doing this work, we know that the Quaker community is united behind it. We are working on behalf of friends and with friends to bring about change, to move a notch closer to the kingdom of heaven on earth. And the other thing that this Heads of Agencies group has been a revelation to me for is that discovery, as we've worked together over the years, that this work is a single shared endeavour between Quakers globally. It's no coincidence, I think, that friends in different places around the world have landed upon the same issues to work upon. And although we do that work in very different ways, the sense of shared commitment to it from friends around the globe is very strong, and that is incredibly emboldening for all of us, I think, as staff working on your behalf.
Thank you, Paul. We comfortable with transitioning to the table over here? Sarah, you happy to start for us? Okay.
Good morning, friends. My name is Sarah Clark, and I serve as the director of the Quaker UN office in New York. So Nazizwe and I are, are sisters in our director responsibilities of this office that exists in two locations. So my work is in New York. I actually live in Philadelphia with my family, so it's great to have an opportunity to be able to stay close to home on a Saturday morning. Thank you all. And for the work that we do in New York, all of our work at the UN in New York is focused on our efforts to engage and to work in partnership with UN diplomats, UN officials, to really lift up, to strengthen, and to bolster that role that the UN was originally intended in terms of bringing about long-term, sustainable, and people-centered peace. So we do that work. We do that by engaging on a number of different areas at the moment. Some highlights for us include some new work that we're doing around looking at the role of including young people and really lifting up and providing meaningful inclusion for young people in UN decision-making processes around efforts to maintain peace. We're also starting some new work and exploring opportunities to engage around the issue of climate action and peace. And then we have some longstanding work that we do around the UN Sustainable Development Goals with a particular focus on goal number 16, which is the peace goal. And then we work on a number of different country-specific situations, which we do in really close collaboration with other Quaker service agencies. In terms of what gives me life in my daily work, I would come back to, I think when you work at the international level, you're working at oftentimes you feel very removed from the reality of people's lives. You are in you may be in very formal meeting rooms where people are using very abstract formal language. And what really provides, sort of inspiration and strength to me in my daily work is the possibility of lifting up and bringing in the really important work that so many of our partners are doing in communities on the ground, so that those conversations that happen at the international level actually relate to the real life and the real needs of, and the real insights of communities on the ground. So and this is something that we do really in collaboration with many of our sister Quaker agencies. So it's a wonderful, rich collaboration. Thanks.
Thank you. Oliver?
Hello, friends. I'm Oliver Robertson, General Secretary of Quaker Peace and Social Witness in Britain. The work that we do, it falls under two main areas. One is around peace and peace building, the other is around climate justice and sustainability, neither of which we expect to be able to solve on our own, but a lot of which involves actually collaboration. There's work we do on behalf of Quakers, where we can say something or produce resources or speak to governments in a way which other Quakers are less able to. But there's also work we do about supporting Quakers to do things themselves, to further their passions, their concerns, and to let their lives speak as well through them themselves. In terms of what gives me hope and life, I think it's actually just doing it, because when you're in a situation where a lot of things in the world are not going the way we want, then actually that can be very disempowering. And having something to be able to do to try to sort of work against that, even in a small way, can be enormously helpful and give you then the energy and the courage to go on and do more. And the bits I find particularly useful and helpful are when we're not just looking at responding to an immediate issue that's happening now and trying to stop something bad, but the things which are about changing the longer arc, the attitudes, the creating the world we want to see, building that kingdom. And so things, whenever I see that happening, it makes my heart lift a little.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you. Joyce Ajluni, General Secretary, AFSC. I think you all know what AFSC does, but I hope you do. I guess the elevator pitch would be that AFSC works with others because we can't do things on our own, to challenge systems of oppression. We are deep-rooted in communities. We are global, and we work around peace building abroad and here at home, just migration work, and just economies work. So 3 pillars of the work. What gives me, is it a question of hope? Hope. Or life?
Life.
Even bigger than hope. I have the privilege of traveling to visit our programs all over the country and all over the world, and that is what gives me life in my work. When I witness firsthand the resiliency and the courage of the communities that we work with, our staff, their creativity, their diligence. I never leave a program site once rejuvenated and invigorated and knowing that that is why I'm here. So that's primarily what gives me life. And I think there's the other thing is really, because we can't do things alone, is when we succeed in making really meaningful connections. Because this work is around relationships. When FCNL and AFSC collaborate on something, and we do such a fantastic job, that gives me life. And when we connect with a yearly meeting on something, and we achieve things together, that gives me life. So I hope more of these opportunities.
Hello. Hello, friends. I'm Bridget Moix, General Secretary of Friends Committee on National Legislation. Many of you also know FCNL, and thank you for being part of FCNL, many of you. FCNL is a Quaker nonpartisan organization that lobbies Congress on issues of peace, justice, and environmental sustainability. We have an office based on Capitol Hill and do direct lobbying with Congress there. And we also work with advocacy teams all around the country to educate them on what's happening and engage people to advocate and lobby their members of Congress. We recently also now run a 40-bed Quaker hospitality civic education guest house, formerly called William Penn House. Many of you probably also know it, and now called Friends Place on Capitol Hill. So that's an exciting new part of FCNL. And we have 13 legislative priorities, so I am not going to go into all of those, but happy to answer questions or share more information. I have lots of materials. And what gives me life right now in the work, FCNL is 80 years old this year, and that is such a grounding source. And we're getting younger every day. We just had our spring lobby weekend in March, and 350 young people from all across the country came to Washington and lobbied to increase funding for community-led violence interruption programs as an alternative to militarized policing. So that was thrilling, incredible, diverse group of powerful leaders who are going to be the next leaders for our organization, and I think our world. And we just had our staff retreat, and we have a wonderful staff. We have about 65 staff now. FCNL has really grown in the last 10 years or so. And we had our first gathering all together, and it's an increasingly diverse staff and increasingly young staff. And at one point, one of the younger staff said, everybody who's under 33 years old, raise your hands. And a third of the hands went up in the room. And then they proceeded to explain that the power structures within our organization did not include many people, if any, under 33 years old, and we better get to work on it, which really gave me life, because now I know we're in good hands. But it is that change work that's ongoing, I think, in all of our organizations and across the Society of Friends that's so important, on inclusion, diversity, justice, equity, anti-racism work that also challenges us and gives me life in that way too.
Thank you. And I do think I would like to also remind everybody that Tracy Martin from the Quaker Council of European Affairs unfortunately couldn't be with us today, virtually or in person. So I just wanted to read a little bit about what QCEA does and then answer her question, provide you her answer to the question. QCEA brings a vision of peace, justice, and equality to Europe and its institutions. We advocate for a new approach to security focusing on nonviolent approaches to conflict. We promote policies that recognize the intrinsic equality of all people everywhere and reduce fear of the other. In addition to our staff in Brussels, QCEA is governed and supported by Quaker communities from across Europe. And Tracy says that life comes from QCEA's new strategy, just launched this month. She says, I'm particularly excited about developing work on dialogue for transformation, bringing people with different views on issues relating to the climate crisis and migration together, and creating a space where they can listen deeply to each other and work towards solutions. We know this work will be challenging, but we feel it is much needed when Europe is becoming a very polarized around these issues and potential for conflict is increasing. So you've heard from this panel about the variety of ways in which Quakers come together, in the way we come together as friends, and in the different communities that we work with. And I was pleased to hear so many of you reference youth. Just this morning, I was reading from the British Junior Yearly Meeting epistle. Oliver, I really liked what I read here. To speak truth to power is as much about knowing when to use our voices as it is to use our silence. This balance is quintessential. If we only speak, we have no chance to listen inclusively. But if we only listen, we cannot bring about change. This balance is the answer. And so my question to this panel is, where do you see Quaker voice being the most powerful today? Where is Quaker voice adding opportunities for change, and how? And I invite the first person to pick up their microphone to answer that question. If not, I will call on someone. Oliver's reaching.
I'll give it a go. I think actually from the British Quaker perspective, one of the most powerful places I see the voice happening is in East Africa, in Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi. Because there was a long-standing program that we had in QPSW called Turning the Tide, which was training people in non-violent action. And after the 2007-2008 post-election violence in Kenya, then Kenyan Quakers were in touch with us about that. We went and did some training with them. And actually, subsequently, they've adapted and refined that model, changed it, and it works better there than it ever did in Britain. And so there's more people involved being able to work on the issues that concern them and their communities. And what we're doing is supporting staff and trainers in Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi to actually take that model and use it with communities to non-violently respond to the issues in their lives. And I think it's great because the Quaker voice doesn't necessarily need to be delivered just by Quakers. It's about the message and the vision rather than the messenger and who's delivering it.
Thank you, Oliver. I would be interested to hear from Nazizwe or Sarah. We heard Oliver talk about direct community engagement. Where you see Quaker voice at the UN level?
So, Nazizwe, I'll jump in and just having listened to Oliver recounting the experience of this work led by QPSW. I'm also struck one thing that's coming up to my mind. Also because Jennifer Preston from Canadian Friends Service Committee is online with us, I'm thinking about some really exciting and new work that our office in New York is doing collaboratively with CFSC tomorrow, actually. And so Jennifer, I'm thinking that you are going to be jumping on a plane sometime really soon to be going to, well, you're going to be coming and visiting with us at Pendle Hill, but also that Canadian Friends Service Committee does really important work in terms of engaging at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues at the UN. And that the Permanent Forum is starting its work on Monday. And so Canadians really do that work. I don't want to speak to Jennifer's work, so I think she should jump in. But Canadian Quakers play a really important role in lifting up Quaker concerns around Indigenous issues. So we're really grateful for the collaboration on that. And we're really grateful to have the opportunity to specifically be collaborating with CFSC tomorrow around some opportunities to bring young people who are going to be attending the Permanent Forum together at Quaker House, and to think about that issue of how the voice of young people can meaningfully be included in the work of the UN, in this instance particularly focused on issues facing Indigenous communities. So, and these are exactly the places where I think, again, it's not necessarily a Quaker, it's not necessarily the voices of individual Quakers, but that we as a community have placed such an emphasis on lifting up the voices that need to be directly included in these high-level processes. And so, that avoiding the trap of UN discussions being kept at this very high-level, remote policy level, and instead trying to find the ways that we can connect the work that the UN does with the reality of people's lives on the ground.
Thank you. You actually led into my next question, which was going to be, how do you bring the community voice in, especially around Indigenous communities? But we did want to hear from Nazizwe to see if you had anything you wanted to add before we jump into that next question.
Thank you. I'm picking up from Sarah. We work across Quaker agencies, supporting one another. For example, I'm in Geneva, but we work closely with QCEA in Brussels on issues of common concern. But as you know, we get our mandate from the Quaker community globally. So we bring those voices from your monthly meeting, your local meeting, your yearly meeting. But also in terms of others who aren't Quakers, We very much ground our work in meaningful participation of the people that are most affected by what the UN is discussing. We ensure that those people come and are present at these meetings. Just recently, our human rights and migration work has been working closely with non-governmental organizations that work with people, indigenous people and others, and they bring them together with diplomats. Just creating that space for an activist to sit across and be listened to by a diplomat is what we do. We facilitate this through our quiet diplomacy, lunches and teas, and this just creates that reality for the diplomats so that they are more aware of what they are doing and how it affects people in their lives.
Thank you. Paul, I see your hand is up.
I wanted to give a different example from some work that we've been doing in the UK, where we've been seeing a steady erosion of what you might call civil society space, the ability of individuals and organizations who are not political parties or the state to campaign, to protest. We've seen limits on how non-profit organizations can campaign at election time. We've seen clauses inserted in funding contracts so that organizations which take state funding can't advocate to government for change in policy, limitations on people's right to protest and the way protests are policed. We're expecting legislation in the next few weeks which will outlaw organizations' ability to join the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign. And we're seeing a real restriction on the human rights framework that the UK has been signed up to. And over the last 10 years, we've been building a coalition of organizations who share our concern about that and coordinating a response that is broad across civil society as a whole, rather than just targeting those issues ourselves, which we don't have the resources to do. And the reason I mention it is because I think actually the Quaker voice probably doesn't come through in that space. What we do is create a neutral space where organizations with a shared concern can come together, can share intelligence and find ways of working together, where the important thing is to build that voice collaboratively across a wide range of organizations, rather than just to be a Quaker voice speaking alone. And I think often that's the role of Friends, is to hold a space for other people to come together. I think we see it in the work of the Quaker UN offices as well. But I think it's an example of something that we can do as, I suppose, a neutral actor, but one with a strong moral position, which is not partisan. And so we stand there as people of faith with a concern that voices can be heard and that our democracy can function well in a way that promotes peace and equality for everybody. And our presence in that space gives strength to others.
Thank you, Paul. Nazizwe, I see you raised your hand. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Or just a quick addition to say that we also produce briefing papers, which is very important for us because it's taking this language from the United Nations, which can be technical, and we distill it to a level to which people can understand, and this increases their participation, including diplomats for that matter, because not everything that they discuss is easy for everyone to understand. For example, in climate justice, the issues are very technical. So we take these technical issues and we simplify them and we put them into easily digestible formats.
Great, thank you. Did anyone else from the panel? Joyce, go ahead. Okay.
Just very quickly, I think that the theme for me when it comes to Quaker voice, and it's always quiet. And there's a lot of humility in bringing our Quaker voices into different places, whether it's a UN meeting happening quietly, off the record, or wherever it's happening. But I think the opportunity, because I think that was the question of our voice rising, is within the faith community. And I think that is something that we have been doing more and more of in different forums, whether in DC or otherwise, is to be active participants in different faith groups. Because what I know is that the Quaker voice is respected, and we need to really leverage that. Oftentimes, when we say we are speaking on behalf of Quakers or we're Quaker organizations, you sense a level of trust and there's a credibility there, and the door opens. And I think we need to do more of that, but I feel that that is a leverage for where our voice really can make a difference.
Thank you, Joyce. And I see Jennifer has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in a little bit too, and on Sarah's comments. We're also excited about the event tomorrow, and the work that CFSC has done with both the tremendous support of both CUNO New York and CUNO Geneva for a long time has been a real hard focus, which was actually once upon a time mandated by FWCC at a triennial, I want to say in Australia, might have been New Zealand. But at any rate, it was an FWCC triennial, and there several Quaker agencies had taken the question of Friends working with Indigenous peoples in solidarity at the international level, and CFSC ended up with that mandate because we were already doing that work, and the CUNOs both obviously had full agendas already. But we've had great support from both CUNOs over a very long period of time, and really that's been about finding the spaces to raise Indigenous people's voices within the international system. And why are Indigenous peoples at the international system? Well, because of the oppression within domestic systems. And so a very simple illustration of this has been that we have, and we will be next week, having a Quaker House, what we call the Quaker House dinner. And I think that both diplomats and Indigenous delegates all are now familiar with the Quaker House dinner, where we bring together about a dozen diplomats and a dozen Indigenous representatives, and on a theme that's of particular relevance at that particular time. And these dinners are kind of a serious irritation to organize, but every time I think to myself, maybe we should stop doing these. At that moment, particularly I heard from diplomats, wow, these are so important. We don't get opportunities to talk to Indigenous representatives in other spaces, and you are providing the space for these really important conversations. So I actually had a Maori scholar reach out to me recently to tell me that in her research, she is talking about the importance of Quaker House dinners and why aren't more people doing things like that. So it's the space that we offer. I am not the chair at those dinners. And so what we are offering both to diplomats and to Indigenous representatives working for justice is a space for communication, and we hold that space.
Can I just build on a couple things? Because one of the great things about this panel is we see connections across our work. The question of listening and speaking, this balance from that is so present in everything and the different ways that we work. And right now in Washington, it is so deeply needed. I've been thinking a lot more about how do I borrow some of those CUNO tools, off the record dialogues for members of Congress, because the divisiveness, the partisanship, the polarization in the US is such that Washington feels even more broken than usual. And so the Quaker voice right now, FCNL was always supposed to bring a Quaker voice to Capitol Hill, but it's really this sense of how do you create space that is a space out of that fray, that is is a nonpartisan, faith-based space so that people can come together across whatever differences without the labels. Desmond's preaching to us, he was preaching to us earlier, really spoke to me about the work that's needed in terms of the Quaker voice in Washington. And on Indigenous issues, it's also about our own listening. And we're working at FCNL on legislation to establish a Truth and Healing Commission on Indian boarding schools. And a big part of the reason that that's an important priority for FCNL is because Quakers ran at least 30 of those schools here in the US. And so grappling with our own history as we do this work is very important for us, for our own healing and for reparations and repair with communities and building right relationships, but also for our country. And in a call with other faith leaders recently about the Truth and Healing legislation, there were Catholic leaders and others, and it really struck me. I realized that other faith communities that ran these schools, they have not been leaning in as hard as many of our yearly meetings are doing now, and Quaker researchers, and it was giving them space to hear Quakers say, we have to do this, we have to reckon with our own history, we have to move policy forward on this for our country, was giving them space too, so.
Thank you, Bridget. I just want to make sure, Tim, to see if you had anything else you wanted to add.
This still on the first question about where the Quaker voice is strongest.
And you can combine it with bringing in community voice around Indigenous people, however, whatever moves you.
Super. I would say briefly that in many ways, the Quaker voice is strongest where the Quaker movement is strongest, and East Africa is one of those places. When I was there around World Quaker Day last year, I was able to meet with some of the people doing this really long-term work. And very little is known about this around the world because we don't hear about the wars that don't happen, and we don't hear about the genocides that don't happen. And part of the reason for this is the work of Quakers with others in those countries. But the one thing that I would add is that I've also spent some time in Central Europe, close to the border with Ukraine and Russia. And see, there's really very tiny numbers of Quakers in those countries, but who are making a disproportionate impact in terms of welcoming refugees from Ukraine and other countries. And I understand that AFSC has supported that. And I have also visited the AFSC office in Burundi and seen the warmth of relationship that there is between the friends there and the AFSC office. On the second question, so in Friends World Committee for Consultation, we have the word consultation in our name. Every big decision needs to be made by a nominated team that has at least one person and usually more from each section. So that means each kind of quarter of the Quaker world is represented in the major decisions. There are some barriers to that. One is a digital divide. Many of our meetings are online and many Quakers are not online. So we are working to address that with grants, with coming up with the World Plenary that's coming up next year. We're trying to kit out a number of Quaker spaces to allow full participation. Language is another barrier. A lot of staff and people very involved in FWCC would speak 2 languages, but English remains the language which is the common language. So if someone doesn't speak English, that can be a problem in the global spaces. But again, next year, the World Plenary will be in 3 languages. The section of the Americas meeting, which happened recently, was in 2 languages throughout. And I will say these are wonderful experiences. If anybody coming into those either doesn't speak English or doesn't speak Spanish, everything is said in both languages. So everyone comes out of them speaking this other language better. And this is a really wonderful vision for how America's wide work could be. And the third one is kind of economic divide. In order to get people physically in the same room is really very seriously expensive. And again, we're working to do this, to bring these voices into the room, having faith that our fundraising will make that possible. And again, a number of people in this room, physically or virtually, have contributed to that. So we do work really hard constitutionally and structurally in our systems to have the voices of the community members making the decisions. But it isn't easy, but we continuously strive. And I'm very inspired to hear about some of the work and some of the successes of other people on this panel and in this room. Bridget, I was particularly inspired to hear how many young people were involved in the recent lobby weekend. I got that impression. It's great to hear those numbers. And again, that's something that I'd like to channel into my work.
Thank you, Tim. So this has been great. We've heard about all of the different ways in which you've been working together and the different groups that you've been working with and how. And I know I have quite a number of follow-up questions, but we really wanted to give you the opportunity to ask questions. So if you have any questions, either follow-up questions to what you've heard or any questions that you want that are burning and you'd like to hear the answer to, please do come up to the microphone and present your questions to the panel. I think we might also have, do we have roaming microphones as well? No, you have to come up to those. So if you come on up, we'll address you, we'll allow you to ask your question. But in the meantime, perhaps what we can do is ask one or two of you to give a very specific example of where you have seen some tremendous resilience in your work. A lot of good thought going on there. Oh, Jennifer has her hand up already. Great.
Yeah. One of the areas that we've seen tremendous resilience in our work is that, and a big file that we've worked really hard on for a very long time was the adoption at the United Nations of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is a human rights declaration, and more than 25 years in the making. And it was the first and to date only UN instrument where the rights holders themselves held equal space on the development of the text with states. And so we were involved in that process and really involved in the lobbying for the adoption of the declaration. The declaration was adopted in 2007, which is some time ago now. And we've spent a lot of time since then working with Indigenous partners. We achieved 2 years ago federal legislation in Canada with a commitment to that UN instrument and towards implementation. All of this is about advancing Indigenous people's rights, both at the international level, but also at the domestic level, and the translation between international work and local work. And one of the things that I've said whenever I'm talking about it, the declaration itself, is it's not useful if it sits on the shelf in a UN library. And something like a human rights declaration has to transform lives of people in their communities. And so we've seen that resilience. We've seen that incredible work done by Indigenous representatives at the UN to achieve this. And now in the work that we're doing in Canada with the federal legislation, and we're also working with international partners, Indigenous partners in other parts of the globe around pushing that at their domestic levels as well. And just one final note on that in terms of resilience, which ties into the declaration, and it also ties into the idea of working with other faith bodies. Of course, we worked in partnership with many Indigenous peoples, mainly from Canada and the US, who worked very hard over a long period of time with the Vatican. And the Pope has repudiated the doctrine of discovery, which is transformational work led by Indigenous peoples, particularly from North America, to put pressure on the Vatican to do that. And, this is something that will help transform, I think, the legacy of colonization. So I think it's an excellent example of resilience.
Thank you, Jennifer. Really appreciate that. I think, Carol, it looks like you have a question.
I always bring things, I try to lighten things up, and I hope this isn't too offensive. Enough about you, now about me. I'm a former clerk of the nominating committee for the American Friends Service Committee. I've been a member of that committee several times, and I am currently the co-clerk, leaving this year as co-clerk of the Friends Relations Committee. And yesterday we broke into small groups talking about how we can better link AFSC and the spiritual lives of Quakers and the Quaker experience to AFSC. And I'm dying to know how you managed to get 350 young people to your programs, and are they mostly friends, and are they people, and can I have their names and addresses? I will help the nominating committee recruit people, because this is God gives me light in the one place I know I don't have to be on the committee to bring people forward. That's the good part. Every one of us can do that. But I really do you actually dedicate staff to these roles of bringing young people in? And do you actively bring not just one friend relations director, but actually people that are bringing people in?
Yeah, great question. Yes, we have staff. We have a young adult program. We just added another staff person. It's just a couple staff person, 2 permanent staff people, and then a rotating program assistant for a year. They're all young people, so it's led by young adults. And it's not enough staff for that program. It's not yet. So a lot of people work on that program and on the Spring Lobby weekend. In terms of bringing people in, that particular weekend has been growing over the years. There are a lot of work in recruitment to colleges, universities, but also beyond to reach young people who are not necessarily in school. And that happens throughout the year. There's a real systematic effort they've developed to do it. What I want to say about connecting the life of friends, and I would say it's maybe a quarter Quaker that comes. And what gives me life about it is that it is so diverse, and it is young people from different faith traditions, different races, different economic backgrounds, different parts of the country. And they get a taste of Quakerism. They interact with Quakers. They learn about the Quaker approach to lobbying and advocacy. I was sitting here in this room at worship. I went to my first meeting for worship in this room. I sat up there in the balcony. I remember it. It was a memorial meeting for Barbara Moffett, for a longtime AFSC staff person. And I didn't know what it was going to be like. I was here for an internship through college that I landed in AFSC for, knowing nothing about Quakers. And I was in tears by the end of the memorial worship, having never known this woman, because I was so moved by the experience. And I had thought, I'm done with religion. I'm not going to have a faith community. And I actually became Quaker because then with FCNL, I got very involved and was invited to be part of committees. And I had to be a Quaker to be on a committee. And I was ready at that time. But a lot of young people might not be ready. And so FCNL changed its bylaws a year or two ago to open a door. So it no longer says you have to be a member of a meeting, but you have to be committed. You have to, be in alignment with these values and a commitment to it. But we've opened the door to say, we want to be more diverse. We want young people and people of all ages from different places to come in and have an experience with us and enliven our community, and to be have that engagement. And I think that is where we need to go. And that is what I think is at FCNL, certainly, and where I see a lot of opportunity. If we just rely on Quakers, we're not going to change the world, that's for sure. And I think Quakers and our community won't change and grow if we don't open those doors.
Thank you. Did you have a question? Yeah, thanks, Mira.
So AFSC has gone through a challenging period, a lot of internal work with restructuring. And I know that it's not unique to AFSC, and there have been a number of articles, in the last year or so about progressive organizations in the US imploding or ineffective or just paralyzed by internal work and division and conflict. And I'm just wondering, I'd love to hear from the non-AFSC, not that you can't speak, Joyce, but to talk a little bit about how you see this and how you're balancing that internal work and need for accountability within our organizations with the need to make change in the world and to be united and strong in making that change in the world.
Thanks. I think that's a great question. And I think if you don't mind, can we get somebody online to answer first? Oh, good. Oh, I have to take these glasses off so I can see. Thank you, Nazizwe.
Thank you. I was going to on the first question about bringing in young people. And I know that the question was directed at FCNL. CUNO has a program, the summer school program, which has developed a huge network of young people who come through our system and often end up as leaders in the world. We are now celebrating 75 years of CUNO, but the summer school has been going since 1955, and we want to reach out to all the participants so that we can visibly see how many young people we have empowered through that program. And thank you for your support.
Thank you. Paul.
Thank you. I'd like to try and respond to the second question. I think there is a real challenge for us as Quaker organizations to be organizations which embody the values that we as Quakers hold. It's not easy to do, and I think progressive organizations always find it difficult. We employ people who are idealists. We employ them because they are idealists and they are great campaigners and they want to change the world. And so they come to our organizations with huge expectations about what they will be like. And we try hard, I think, to meet those expectations, but we have to be careful not to imagine that a Britain Yearly Meeting employs 150 people. If you put 150 people in a room, some of them will fall out with each other, whether they're Quakers or not, whether they work for a progressive organization or not. So what's important is how you have good processes, good conversations internally, how you don't go into a space of defensiveness and denial about the things that are challenging, but expect the challenges and work with them and use them as a space to learn. We had some issues in Britain Yearly Meeting 4 or 5 years ago with allegations of racism on the staff and by Quakers towards staff, and those have been important points for us to work with and to learn from. It's not been an easy process, and we are still working on that. I think the other thing I would say is that we should be very wary of a trap which says Quaker organizations should do everything differently from everybody else. We are not as unique as we think we are. There is a lot of good practice in other organizations which we can learn from. And so we have to be real, I think. And a question I find it useful to ask myself always is, what is the difference between an excellent organization and a Quaker organization? And we have to be an excellent organization. And then on top of that, we have to be a Quaker organization which has that Quaker distinctiveness about it. But if we're not also excellent, then I think we're not living up to the expectations we set ourselves to be a Quaker organization in the first place.
Thank you, Paul. Bridget, did you want to jump in, or?
I was just going to respond to the internal and the external. I heard you saying, like, how do you deal with both these? So I've just been in this position for a year. And when I came in, I thought, oh, great, I'm going to be lobbying Congress. Well, no, I was like restructuring the organization and figuring out what do we do with our community and culture is what we call it now. And so we have a new department around community and culture and all this AJEDI or DEI work that we need to do. And I just don't think we can do one without the other. And that's hard. You have to figure out how to balance your time and your resources and, make sure you can do both somehow, the both and, but we can't create the world we seek without trying to be the world we seek. And we're not going to reach either of those perfectly anytime soon. But we have to be intentionally trying on all those levels. And I would add the third level, which is our individual work. And every one of us, growing up in the US certainly has to do the individual work of trying to undo our internal systems of racism that are built into our lives and our society. And we just have to be like vulnerable and open and messy and just dig into it. And I will say, if you want to engage young people, if you are not doing the internal work and you are not trying to fix your institution, and forget it, because I have 2 boys, they're teenagers, and their life is completely intersectional, diverse, inclusive. And I take them to Quaker meeting and I'm like, wow, this is like the whitest space they've ever been in. And they're like, where are we? And I will say that when I came to internship at AFSC in college, first exposure to Quakers, I was like, this is so cool. They're so diverse. It's like, it was the first time I was exposed to so much diversity, so much, gender, sexuality, all these issues. And so, there is a really important role, certainly that AFSC plays in holding that, but that all of our institutions and yearly meetings need to really, open up into more and be willing to bravely do that work so that our work in the world will be better and will be more effective too.
I see that Jennifer has her hand up, and a few people in the room also had questions. I also want to encourage those of you online to raise your hand if you have questions. So Jennifer will hear from you, and then those who want to ask questions in the room or online.
Yeah, just really briefly, and I totally agree with what everybody else has already said on this point, especially about that the 2 pieces have to go together. But I just wanted to say that we did develop a resource in the last few years about what makes a Quaker voice different, and it was about like why are we not exactly the same as Amnesty International, right? And so we did develop that resource because we aren't the same as Amnesty International, and so that is something that we felt, and also around the issue of progressive voices, and progressive voices sometimes also becoming quite aggressive in a way that we would not see as friendly. And so that there is a difference, and staying in that Quaker space and staying true to our testimonies in all of our work is really critical to us, and to be reminded of that all the time. So I do think that that's something that we have to be thinking about all the time in our work.
Thank you. David?
Thank you, friends. I'm David Henkel from Santa Fe, monthly meeting. I have a question that is stimulated, I think, by the ways in which you operate at different levels in our world and are connected either directly or less directly with Quaker constituents. But the question I have, and this may be complicated to answer, if maybe only one person could represent it, is given the different perspectives and the joint purpose that you share, how do you engage with issues of human migration?
Well, I was hoping you would all be raising your hand, since we did write a beautiful statement on migration together. So who would like to answer that question first? Thank you, Oliver.
I'll give it a go. So I think actually where it is, I think the unity comes in the core underlying principles, and that's why things like this joint migration statement was so useful, because it affirms, the equal humanity and the equal dignity of all people. And I think that when you're working on issues where you're going to need to be doing it for a long time, either because the tide is against you or because actually there's an element of cultural work and trying to change attitudes and mindsets of entire groups or nations, or certainly governing classes, then it's really important to hold that, that North Star, to borrow a phrase from AFSC, to hold that North Star of where you're trying to get to, what the ultimate end is you seek. But because we're working in different places, then of course the specifics of what you're doing in your steps towards that are different. And I think the real advantage of a group like this, heads of agencies meeting, is it's where we can see and connect and strengthen each other. So, you know, I know that things like work at the United Nations, then actually what they can do is to get that sort of global principle agreed by, this is what the world's countries all say together. And then it means that those of us working at national or regional levels can then take that back as an extra resource to say, and this is not just what we think you should be doing, but what others say you should be doing, what the world says you should be doing. And also in some of the sort of more details and specifics, it gives, you can have there are good ideas and examples that you can borrow and use and take from one place to another. And I think that certainly my experience of dealing with politicians is it's much more powerful to say, this is something which actually works and here's the example, than I've got this great idea and a theory and you should do it because I think it's a great one. And so that sort of sharing and collaboration and connection, some of which happens at our level, but actually I see a lot of my role is not actually trying to do that. My role, because I speak to different bits of the Quaker and other world more than some of my colleagues, my role is to keep my ear out, as I'm doing all week here, to see what the connections are and then link up other people who can make best use of that to take things forward.
Thank you. I think I saw Nazizwe's hand up. Or was that a mistake? Did you have a response to the question?
I'm a bit covered by Oliver, but I wanted to just add a bit to say that in Geneva, we have a very strong program on migration and human rights, led by Laurel Townhead, who is deeply committed to the issue of migration justice. And I just wanted to mention that I've put it as a question, isn't it amazing that the United Nations was able to come together and agree on a global compact on migration? And that compact is in place. But as you know, the challenge is in the implementation of this framework. So what Laurel and her program do is to speak to countries to just remind them of what is in the compact. And just recently in New York, there was a review of this migration framework. So our role remains to remind those at the UN about the right to migration. And I think that's a basic right. It's important for all of us to do this, to remind them of this right. And also with our program, we have also focused on racism in migration, because even though we have this compact, the way it is implemented is still very racist in a whole number of ways. So this has become part of the work that we do to actually put that work in place.
Thank you. I think we have a couple more questions from the floor, and then we'll start to wrap up, because I think you're supposed to have lunch at noon, or 12:30, if I'm not mistaken. And I just wanted to add to the migration statement, what I thought was really beautiful about being a part of that was, it wasn't just sitting down as organizations and coming up with the words. We spent a lot of time, I think Joyce, you had said it was 2 years, if I remember correctly, of learning about our work, learning about the context and where we worked, the different compacts and regulations across the globe. A lot of that went into it. And even with that, we felt like it was still a small community that was coming together to put this statement together, and really wanting to be able to hear more of the global voice, and yet feeling the need to present this statement. So I do encourage you all to read it. We did. We had a dialogue and exchange program. We've had a couple on migration. We've recently just hired 2 new migration directors for the US and international programs. So we identified this as a common way to work right away and jumped right into it. And now we just have to keep the energy going as we focus on living into our testimonies and making time for all of the exciting things going on. And I know you've been eager to ask your questions, so please.
This is more a query, so I don't think it's even fair to ask for a response. I just want to put it out there, and then you can ask the last question there. I asked Joyce this when I came on the board a year and a half ago. I talked to Diane about this, her predecessor. This is maybe unquakerly, which is why I don't think it's fair to ask for a response. But I also think it's necessary in this moment in this world. So often we have more and more very clear global political issues, violence particularly. And the only voices besides the talking heads on all the different networks that we can sometimes look to are Dalai Lama, or which is in the news as well, or the Pope. And then every now and then the Mormon current prophet comes up, but usually it's very localized. I have always wished that somehow your group of leaders, our community, it's not Quakerly to have one person speak for all of us. And yet at the same time, it would be so nice to have even your leadership somehow be able to come together and have a voice to say, by the way, the Quakers condone this, by the way, the Quakers, majority Quakers, whatever you need to say, quantified, but this is wrong, or this is how we would do this. And as much as I have great respect for working behind the scenes, Steve's my dad, so I get it. It also, in my feeling, is profoundly needed to also have something that people can hear, especially when so many people don't realize what our religion is today. We're unknown by so many people, and to have, I just wish that were the case, and I hope somebody can figure out a way.
Thank you for sharing that.
I just nominated Oliver to be our Quaker Pope.
Yeah, I think I need to do some discernment on that.
Yes, please. Well, I see the white puff of smoke rising. I'm Brian Core, friends of me at Cambridge, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, New Cambridge. And first, I mean, amazing panel, so thank you. And thank you for your work on behalf of all of us. I've been struck by a number of threads in this conversation and this idea of Quaker faith and Quaker practice. And so I think we struggle and think a lot, at least in my part of the service committee in my monthly meeting, about how are we being clear about our Quaker faith and how does that show up in what we do. And yet what's coming through to me is this set of questions around our Quaker practice. I mean, Paul spoke about being excellent and Quaker, the role of committees, discernment, having a Quaker pope, who's the spokesperson for the majority of Quakers. And so I want to ask you, to the extent I know we're running out of time, to talk about how Quaker practice is part of what you do and how it's, positive, negative, amazing, challenging, because I think that's so much of what, for me, is powerful about Quakerism. It's not just what we believe in, but how we do our work together. Thank you.
I want to, actually, I see that we have John online has a question. And what I'd like to do is I'd like you to think about that answer as you get ready to move into your retreat next week. And you start to think about how do we work together. As a closeout, what I'd like to hear from each of you is how is it, what would you like to see as a group of global Quakers, and how does the practice come into that as well? So we will hear John's question, and then I think you also will hear two quick questions. Yeah.
I don't need an answer, they're more like queries, so I can just say them really quick, and you can just take it with you to your retreat. But there are three queries. The first one is, with the growing prospects of war and conflict brewing with China and Russia, how are we prepared as Quaker organizations to respond to this? My other question is, how can we further expand on this growing collaboration across your organizations with other Quaker institutions, namely colleges, universities, and schools? And I say this to the president of Guilford College here, and vice versa. And my third query is, how can we balance, and this was kind of a question that I wanted an answer for, but it's definitely also a query. How can we balance the desire to engage younger generations and Quaker work through practices such as loosening restrictions and definitions around Quaker identity, while also maintaining the need to maintain Quaker identity and community, and still also employ and engage Quakers in our work in meaningful ways?
I feel like we need to extend our time and not go to lunch. Those are great. I feel like this is a conversation that could really continue, but I do want to be mindful and respectful of those who are in a different time zone, and we are going into their dinner time as well. So, John, where did you disappear to? I don't see you on the screen anymore. Did you still have your question?
Oh, I was getting hungry, but I was thinking about accompaniment on just migration. We accept and welcome and invite many immigrants here in Pacific Northwest, largely from Central America. I think about how do our different organizations respond to the other end of the migration bridge, and how do we accompany those people who have not decided to try to come to the U.S. And how can I be an accompaniment for people who stay behind, as well as those who have come into my neighborhood?
Would one of you like to answer that question on accompaniment? Bridget.
Well, this will not be a full answer because it's not going to address, well, I guess maybe I can expand it and try to address the whole question. We do have a just migration advocacy lobbying program, and Nika Forrest and I, she's the lead lobbyist, went to the border, southern border of the US and across to Mexico to understand more about the situation. And one of the big things that came out of that spoke to us very clearly was the need to really create a system of welcome and care, for a humane system of welcome and care for migrants. We were thinking about in the US, and actually Friends Place has opened their doors to migrants unexpectedly. We did not plan to do this, and hosted over 600 migrants at Friends Place in Capitol Hill once they started busing migrants up from the border to Washington, D.C. So we had to be open to like changing the things that we were doing and responding quickly to a situation, which is not always Quaker practice, I would say. That's one of the things I was thinking about. But I think thinking about how our organizations are positioned in different places of power, decision-making, community, and how do we create something on migration that is a system of welcome and care and rights at all those levels is the kind of example of how do we work better together that I would love to see our organizations try to figure out. How do we move beyond a statement and say, well, how do we use the power that we have in these organizations and the positions that we are in, grounded in community and the needs on something like migration, to really work in a more coordinated way together?
Well, Bridget, it sounds like you've actually started to answer that last question. So perhaps what we can do is, if we can go down the table and then to the friends online with your last closeout comments. Please feel free to respond to any of the queries that you've heard, something that, again, that moves you that you want to respond to. But we want to leave with an uplifting message of what it is that you really hope to be able to continue to do together, and how you can have the faith live through our work. So Joyce, do you want to go next? And then we'll go Oliver, Sarah, and folks online to close out.
I hope of what we can do together. I think that the first thing is that we really do the hard work together of wrestling and toiling with the difficult things that are on our agendas. Oftentimes we have a list of like 10 things we want to follow up on, and I'm hoping we can boil it down to a few. I'm especially excited about a session on institutional racism and reparations that we're having next week at Pendle Hill together. And like you said, Bridget, we need to do the deep dive, and we need to really listen to each other and learn from each other and give strength to each other, because this is critical work for all of us, and we are at the different places in our organization. So I think that we have something to add as a community of Friends leaders, and our commitment needs to be stronger, and how we can strengthen each other towards that is something that I'm really, really looking forward to.
I think one thing I'd say at the end, which is trying to respond to one of the not quite questions, or the too big to answer now questions around sort of dealing with conflicts that we can see might be coming, is that I think there are two bits. One is that it's important. I think we heard last night with Ambassador Young about the value that having that kind of connection and relationship existing with somebody can have in terms of being able to then change and influence them. And I think that sort of, friendly, big F, small f friendliness, which you can have, is something which may not be able to overcome big political movements and decisions, but might make you more able to then react and respond to them and try to think together of ways out of it. And that's why I think organizations like the Friends House Moscow, which for 30 years has been doing work in Russia and neighboring countries around peace and nonviolence, is really valuable, and having those opportunities in spaces, even if we don't always see the immediate way in which they can change the big things of the world. The other thing I'd just say is that I've always been very impressed as well by Quakers being able to look at some of the sort of more forgotten issues and conflicts. And I can think of, there's one small conflict in Asia where there are Quakers working very quietly to help the sides come together and reconcile and work out a peace agreement. And that's something where actually, if we weren't involved, I don't think anyone else would be there. And that, the Ukraine war, I know one of the reasons why some of our organizations have been less involved in it than we would have been otherwise is because actually all the people who need to speak to each other, they have each other's numbers, they're able to. The issue is about political decisions and political will, whereas there are other spaces where actually that's not there, and so our presence can make a real difference.
I'm going to start by just thanking my fellow panelists, and I feel like you have the preceding three interventions have named really important things for all of us to be thinking about in the coming days, and I'm really looking forward to that. I also think one thing that comes to mind, and I was just saying to Oliver before we sat down, was that part of this opportunity for heads of agencies to come together is really, it's this really unique space, and I want to bring it back to the Quaker practice question. I find it so grounding to have that opportunity to be with other Quaker leaders and to be not just working our way through an agenda, but thinking about our work in terms of an expression of the Spirit working through us. And that's something, that's what ostensibly all of our work is. But it's really important to be very deliberate about that. And I think there is something about coming together with Quaker colleagues that allows us to be really centered and deliberate in the way that we do that. And this has been a theme that's come up a little bit for us at CUNO New York recently, even in thinking about our governance, our approaches to governance. And Peter Woodrow, who's here with us, has helped our governance body, which is a body of drawn from, represents Quakers from around the world, and from different traditions, to really think about how we center that work of discernment that guides Quaker work at the UN to be to be spirit-led and to be an expression of the divine working through us. I also have to say, I'll just very quickly say that I love this. I'm very excited to hear the theme and this question about Quaker identity and the membership. I think this has been something that I have wrestled with for a long time. I do a lot of work with Quaker schools as well, and I've been on a number of boards of Quaker schools, and the issue of Quaker membership and representation on Quaker school boards is always contentious. It's difficult, but it's also this issue of how can we open our communities, because there are so many people out there who, first off, who embody what we believe and what we practice. And there are also people who may identify as Quaker, but for whom the act of applying for membership is not something that, that the spirit has not moved them in that way. And it's, so I would just love to engage in that conversation. And I think that that's something for all of our organizations to think about, is how we engage in that conversation. Would really welcome engaging in that further as we move forward.
Thank you. Looks like we still have Paul, Nazizwe, and Jennifer online. I don't see Tim. We might have lost him. Oh, good. Paul, do you want to go?
Shall I go next? Just
Yes,
picking
please.
up on that Quaker identity point. One of the best Quaker organizations I know of has no Quaker employees at all, and half its board are Friends. And it's doing extraordinary work on poverty in East London, in a very deprived area of the city. So I think we have to be careful not to be too precious about Quaker identity. And for me, it ties into the point I made earlier about uniqueness and not assuming that we have something that others don't. But I want to come back to the query about Quaker practice and how that sort of ties in with faith, because it links for me to the work we're going to be doing over the next 2 or 3 days when we meet together as heads of agencies. And it's this point about the importance of finding the shared humanity with the people we're dealing with. What George Fox talked about as, if we live our lives as patterns and examples, then we will come to walk cheerfully over the world, answering that of God in everyone. And how do we work with the people we disagree with profoundly and recognize the glory of God in them? And I'm thinking of examples. We did some work a few years ago working for the legalization of the marriage of same-sex couples in Britain. And I remember sitting in rooms there with people from other faiths and from political parties who were implacably opposed to what we were doing on behalf of their institutions. And then sitting in the meeting feeling hopeless that there was these ranks of people who disagreed with what we were trying to achieve. And then in the elevator on the way out of the building after the meeting, having a completely different conversation with those same people, where they were saying, I'm sorry I had to say that, that's our official position, but good on you, and we hope you get somewhere. And you need to know that a lot of us are right behind you. And so I'm very wary of situations where an institution speaks to another institution in a corporate voice. I think we have to find those connections as fellow humans with one another, find those points of common ground, recognize that of God in the other, including the other people who really do disagree with us. And I think that's a precious piece of Quaker practice that we take into the work that we do.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Oh, I have so many things running through my head, but I'm going to try and be brief. One of the things that I actually have been carrying sort of with me as an internal query for the past several years in an ongoing way is what is it that I am called to do? And I hold that with me in terms of my work always as we're making decisions and as we're carrying out our work. What is it that I am called to do? And I think that it's really helpful in terms of bringing faith into the practical pieces that we do. For me, one of the things about, yes, and let's think, it was 150 years ago that Quaker population dive bombed because they wouldn't allow people to marry out. So you couldn't, if you were going to marry a non-Quaker, you weren't a Quaker anymore, and our numbers, dumped. So the question of Quaker membership, I think that one of the interesting things, just an interesting example that we've done at CFSC in the last few years, we realized that we had some partners that we had really valuable relationships with, and they assisted in our committee work in an informal way. And so we decided that we could have associate members of CFSC that were not friends. And that is something that enriches our committee's work and enriches, bringing other perspectives to the work of our program committees. So that was something, it was a conscious choice to be broader in the people that we're working with. And in how we work together. I think one of the awesome things about having a connection with other Quaker organizations is how we discover informally and formally the linkages that already exist, and sometimes we don't even know those linkages are there, and then we're like, wait a minute, we really need to be more connected on this. And so finding the ways to do that enriches. Certainly, we're a small organization, and we have a staff team of 8. And we do a lot of work with a small team, and being able to be connected with other Quaker organizations who are larger than we are is of tremendous benefit to us in the work that we do, in being to amplify our work and learn from the work of other Quaker organizations.
Thank you. Nazizwe and then Tim.
Thank you. I wanted to assure Nick Thomas that we do work behind the scenes, but it's largely those of us who work with the diplomats and the United Nations. The rest of this collective, including, for example, FWCC, BYM, Britain Yearly Meeting, AFSC, FCNL, all have their individual voices as well. So they can speak out on issues as they are guided. The 5-way sign-off allows us to consult one another, but also to gain strength from one another as we represent the voices of Quakers. I do hope that as we go forward, even as we have begun, we will continue to strengthen the collaboration among agencies, because we can learn from one another. I therefore thank all of you for having created this space.
Tim, please.
Shall I go next?
Yep.
Can I thank everyone for these queries, which we will take in our minds and our hearts into this meeting that we're having next week. These are crucially important questions about how we stop the next war, how we ensure that Quaker process is guiding what we are doing, by which I mean we have a process whereby the Spirit of God leads the work that we do. I am of the view that there's that of God in everyone, not simply that of God in every Quaker. So if we set up a system whereby we discern that, then we can have all kinds of people involved in our decision making. That was a lovely question as well about the loose definition, how we can loose the definitions about Quaker identity. That's centrally important to our work, because Quakerism looks very different in different parts of the world, yet we are still firm in the faith and part of a family of friends. I see that exists, and I'd love to share more about that and see if that can help us. On the question about communication, I said at the beginning that our mission is to bring Quakers together from different backgrounds to express our common heritage and our Quaker message to the world. And I think actually in the 10 years or so since that mission statement was agreed, I think we've been very, very good at bringing Quakers together from different backgrounds. We bring that to the two Quaker United Nations committees that informs the work of QNO. We bring that to the World Council of Churches. But actually, in terms of getting that out into the world, into the media, that kind of thing, I think we haven't been set up in such a way to do that. And that's something that I'd really like to investigate, to wonder if that can be part of what I contribute to changing during my time in this role. Could I finish though? A lot of us on this Heads of Agencies group have a strong connection to QNO in one way or another, either as staff members or funders or co-workers or collaborators or committee members. And AFSC, I'm sure you know this, but AFSC's role in that is absolutely central and fundamental. So I would like to thank you and everyone in this room and everyone connected to AFSC and Joyce for the work that you do to sustain QNO, because QNO has been sustained for 75 years. It's this wonderful example of joint working through joint Quaker process with Quakers from diverse backgrounds all around the world, which is making difference over the long term. So I'd like to finish with that specific thanks for your connection to QNO, and thank you for upholding us next week as we meet as well.
Thank you. I think that was a beautiful summary from everybody. This was quite an invigorating panel. I want to thank everybody for extending your time to be with us, especially those of you that are later in the evening in different time zones. And I think Veronica has one last, Joyce, did... I don't have a question. Announcement.
We're going to take a picture. Is it the businesses before or after? Sure. Okay. Okay.
Right now.
So we have one last piece of business before we take our picture, but I think Joyce wanted to make one last comment, and then I'll hand the mic over to Veronica. Yeah.
I just wanted to welcome Kyle Farnbury. Kyle just joined us. He is the president of Guilford College. I just wanted to, another Quaker leader, leading a Quaker organization, and so welcome. We're glad you're with us.
Beautiful, thank you. Veronica, did you want to come up here and thank you? Let's thank the panelists before Veronica speaks.